February 1943. 5000 feet over the English Channel. The engines of the B-17 Flying Fortress thrum steadily through the cold, crisp air. Inside the bomber, the crew moves in synchronized rhythm, each man performing his task fully aware of the risks they face. Staff Sergeant John Tex Carter checks the M2 Browning, 50 caliber machine gun mounted in his position. His fingers tighten around the cold metal, and his eyes scan the horizon. The B-17 is a flying fortress, but the gun in front of him is its first line of defense. Carter had trained for this moment. He knew the gun well. The M2, introduced a decade earlier, was the epitome of American firepower. Firing 600 to 850 rounds per minute, its 50 caliber rounds were capable of shredding through metal, making it an invaluable asset for bombers like the B-17. The M2 was mounted on multiple positions on the bomber, each providing cover against the relentless assault of enemy fighters. But for the German Luftwaffe, the M2's reputation had spread far beyond its technical specifications. It was a weapon they dreaded. As the B-17 flies toward its target, the hum of the engines is soon drowned out by the sound of enemy aircraft approaching. Carter's heart rate quickens. His training kicks in. He braces himself, ready for the imminent attack. From his gunner's seat, he can see the black dots in the distance, tiny but quickly growing larger. The Luftwaffe pilots, perhaps 3,000 feet below, are making their move. Carter's hand tightens around the trigger. His knuckles go white as the first of the German planes dives toward the bomber. Without hesitation, the M2 comes to life. The weapon barks, sending a flurry of 50 caliber rounds into the air. Carter's eyes narrow, his breath steady as he tracks the incoming fighter. The M2's recoil is a familiar rhythm, as each shot finds its mark, sending the German fighter veering off course, trailing smoke as it spirals out of control. The bomber is safe, at least for now. The first victory, though small, sends a message. The M2 is not just a machine, it's a force to be reckoned with. For the Luftwaffe pilots, this moment is nothing new. The B-17's defenses have earned them a reputation. American bombers have long been a formidable presence in the skies, but it wasn't just their size or number that made them dangerous. It was the M2. From the ground, it was easy to underestimate the impact of a machine gun, especially when it was mounted on a massive aircraft. But for the German pilots up close, the M2 was a different beast altogether. The Germans had relied on their own fighters, such as the Messerschmitt Bf 109 and the Focke-Wulf 190, to engage and destroy bombers. They knew how to hunt in packs, coordinating attacks to overwhelm their targets. But as the M2S opened fire, that plan began to break down. The B-17 seconds were no longer just bombers. They had become deadly, self-sustaining units, capable of defending themselves with terrifying effectiveness. For the German pilots, the M2 had become the embodiment of their frustration. Despite their superior tactics, they were being outmatched by a weapon they had never anticipated. It wasn't just the power of the M2, it was its precision, its ability to find its target in a split second. The M2 could tear apart the thin armor of their aircraft with a single burst of fire, sending them spiraling toward the earth. The German pilots' challenge was not only to destroy the B-17, but to get close enough to do so. The closer they came, the more likely they were to be torn apart by the M2. The bomber formations, each equipped with multiple M2S, formed a deadly web of fire that could turn an ambush into a suicide mission. Each machine gun mounted on the B-17 was not just a defense, it was an offensive weapon in its own right, an extension of the aircraft itself. To the Germans, it was a signal that they were not fighting just a bomber, they were fighting a well-coordinated, self-sufficient killing machine. The M2 wasn't just about firepower, it was also a psychological weapon. The fear it instilled in the Luftwaffe pilots grew with every encounter. The Germans had long prided themselves on their advanced technology, but the American M2 made them question their own. It was a constant reminder that the Americans had achieved a technological leap that no one had anticipated. As the M2 tore through the skies, it was clear the war in the air had changed. And as the American bombers pressed on, the M2 kept them safe. With each successful defense, the gun's legend grew. What started as a simple piece of equipment became a symbol of American superiority. a testament to the power of industrial might and technological innovation. For the Germans, the M2 wasn't just another weapon, it was the face of their defeat. Carter, unaware of the terror his M2 is causing far below, fires another burst. The aircraft wobbles as a German fighter comes too close, but Carter's aim is true. The M2 does its job. The German fighter disappears in a cloud of smoke, and the B-17 continues on its course. As the mission presses on, Carter can feel the weight of the M2. It's not just about the shots fired, it's about the knowledge that each pull of the trigger is a step closer to victory. For the American crew, the M2 is more than just a tool. It's their protector, their shield against an enemy that's learning the hard way just how dangerous the M2 truly is. The M2 has arrived, and with it, the game has changed. July 1943. Skies over Sicily. The heat of the Mediterranean sun radiates down, baking the landscape below. In the cockpit of his Messerschmitt Bf 109, Oberleutnant Hans Keller feels the weight of the war pressing on him as he scans the horizon. Below, the American bombers are closing in their massive formations, slowly becoming more defined against the clear blue sky. His stomach tightens and a bead of sweat drips down his forehead despite the airspeed pushing into his face. Keller's squadron has been tasked with intercepting the B-17 seconds, and they know the drill: fast, aggressive, and overwhelming. But this time, it's different. The Americans have proven time and again that they're not just bombers, they're flying fortresses, equipped with the kind of firepower that can turn an ambush into a massacre. The M2. Browning. 50 caliber machine guns mounted on the B-17 seconds are their nightmare, and Keller is no stranger to the damage they can cause. As his squadron draws closer to the formation, Keller knows the attack has to be executed perfectly. They can't afford a single misstep. The first wave of German fighters dives in screaming toward the bomber formation. But as they close in, something shifts. A sudden burst of fire from the B-17 seconds sends a German fighter spiraling into the sky. Keller's heart skips a beat as he watches the enemy plane plummet, flames trailing behind it. For a moment, Keller hesitates. The M2s have done their work. The German fighter has been shredded before it even came close to its target. He pushes the doubt aside. They have a job to do. The squadron presses on. The next few moments blur in Keller's mind. Another bomber opens fire, and a second German plane is shredded by a flurry of rounds. Keller's stomach drops. His own aircraft shudders as he feels the impact of near misses from the M2s. He realizes with chilling clarity that they're not just fighting to destroy the B-17 seconds, they're fighting a weapon that can fight back. It's not just the numbers or the bombers themselves, it's the M2. Keller's plane lurches again as more M2s open fire. He pulls hard on the stick, trying to evade the incoming onslaught. The B-17 seconds in their massive formations have become almost invulnerable. The defensive firepower from the M2s makes it impossible for the Luftwaffe pilots to get close enough to deal the killing blow. Instead, they're caught in a deadly game of cat and mouse, with the M2s acting as the cat, an unrelenting force that can kill from hundreds of yards away. As the battle rages on, Keller experiences a moment of clarity. He's no longer just trying to break the bomber formation. He's trying to survive. The M2. Browning. 50 caliber machine guns have become the single greatest threat in the skies. Not because they're the most powerful weapon, but because they change the nature of the fight. No longer can the Luftwaffe expect to come in from above or below with impunity. No longer can they rely on speed alone. The M2s are keeping the bombers safe, and the Germans, despite their advanced tactics, can't seem to counter it. The realization hits Keller like a hammer. Below, the M2s are a force multiplier. They allow the B-17 to remain a formidable offensive weapon in its own right, capable of defending itself with overwhelming force. No longer are the bombers just targets. They're deadly, armed to the teeth and flying through the heart of the European skies. As Keller takes a sharp turn to avoid another barrage of fire, he spots one of his wingmen trailing smoke. Another plane in his squadron is down. The M2s have claimed another victim. Keller curses under his breath. His frustration boils over, but there's nothing he can do. The American gun crews are skilled, too skilled. And the M2 itself is an instrument of pure destruction, a testament to the might of American engineering and military strategy. For the Luftwaffe pilots, the M2 has become a symbol of everything that is wrong with the war. It represents a technology gap they can't overcome. It's a reminder that despite their best efforts, the Germans are always one step behind. The M2 isn't just a machine, it's a psychological weapon that wears down the resolve of even the most battle-hardened pilots. Each burst of fire chips away at their confidence. Each failed attempt to bring down the American bombers feels like another loss in the war. Keller pulls his aircraft into another evasive maneuver, but it's too late. Another German fighter has been lost. He looks out the window, watching the wreckage of a fallen comrade tumble toward the earth. The German pilots have now witnessed the power of the M2 up close, and they understand one thing: they're not fighting a bomber anymore. They're fighting a fortress in the sky, equipped with a weapon that will continue to haunt them for the remainder of the war. The M2 50 caliber machine gun is more than just a weapon. It's a game changer. And for the Luftwaffe pilots, it's a constant reminder of their failure to adapt, to innovate, and to survive against an American adversary that has mastered the art of war. October 1943. The skies over Italy. The B-17 flying fortress formations rumble overhead, casting shadows across the barren landscape below. Major General Friedrich von Paulus watches through his binoculars as the American bombers approach. His hands tremble, slightly betraying his calm exterior. The months of relentless fighting have worn him down, but this was something new. The German defensive lines, thought to be impenetrable, were being tested in ways that could not have been foreseen. Von Paulus knew the importance of air superiority. He had long understood that control of the skies was the key to controlling the battlefield. But the arrival of the American bombers with their heavy firepower had shifted the balance. He had seen it in the air before, how the B-17 seconds flying in tight formations could repel enemy attacks with their well-coordinated defenses. But now, standing here in the Italian campaign, he was seeing it firsthand. It wasn't just their numbers that made the B-17 seconds so dangerous, it was the M2 Browning 50 caliber machine guns that had become their most lethal feature. As the B-17 seconds descended into range, von Paulus surveyed the German defensive positions that had been established along the coast. Tanks were in position, infantry crouched behind fortifications, and the air was filled with the sound of distant artillery. The Luftwaffe had already launched several attacks to break up the bomber formations, but with little success. The M2S mounted on the bombers had made it impossible for the German fighters to close in. Every time a pilot attempted to dive toward the American bombers, he was met with a hail of T-50 caliber rounds that shredded his aircraft before he could even get close. Von Paulus knew that if the B-17 seconds were able to hit their targets today, it would be a disaster for the Germans. The M2 was more than just a defensive weapon. It had become a symbol of American technological and tactical superiority. The German forces had done their best to counter it, deploying their own anti-aircraft defenses, but nothing seemed to work. The M2's accuracy and firepower tore through everything the Germans had. Tanks, trucks, and infantry positions were being decimated by the sustained barrage of 50 caliber rounds. The first wave of B-17 seconds releases their bombs, and the earth trembles as explosions rock the ground. The damage is catastrophic. Von Paulus watches as one of his tanks, which had been positioned on high ground, is obliterated in a single strike. The once imposing German fortifications are being reduced to rubble, and the soldiers in the trenches are scrambling to reposition themselves, but the M2S from above are everywhere. Every attempt to reorganize the defensive lines is met with waves of fire from the bombers above. As the bombers press on, von Paulus can only watch as the German positions disintegrate. The M2S continue their deadly work, providing a defensive shield for the bombers, while simultaneously devastating anything in their path. The effectiveness of the M2 becomes painfully clear. It's not just about air superiority anymore. It's about the ability to transform a seemingly vulnerable bomber into a heavily armed, nearly impenetrable fortress. And the Germans are powerless to stop it. Von Paulus knows that he's losing the battle. The German forces, despite their strength, cannot overcome the precision and overwhelming power of the American attack. The M2 Browning 50 caliber machine gun is proving to be the key to the American success. It has allowed the B-17 seconds to remain a formidable force in the air, even when under heavy attack. What had been thought of as a vulnerability, the bombers' need for protection had been turned into their greatest strength. The German soldiers below, once confident in their defences, now realize that they are fighting against an enemy who can deliver devastating blows from above. The sound of the M2S fills the air, constant and unrelenting, as American bombers continue their assault. It is no longer just about the bombers themselves, it is about the psychological toll the M2 is taking on the German forces. Each burst of fire from the M2 is a reminder of the growing technological gap between the two sides, a gap that the Germans cannot bridge. For the soldiers below, there is no escape. The M2S are everywhere on the bombers overhead in the jeeps and trucks driving through the battlefield. German troops scramble to find cover, but they know that it's only a matter of time before the American firepower overwhelms them. The M2 has turned the tide of the battle. It has become the weapon that the Germans fear the most, not because of its raw power, but because of its ability to neutralize German defenses before they can even react. As the battle continues, the Germans are left with the bitter realization that their tactics, their equipment, and even their resolve are no match for the overwhelming might of the American industrial war machine. The M2 Browning 50 caliber machine gun is not just a weapon, it is the embodiment of everything they are fighting against: precision, power, and the relentless march of American technological superiority. For von Paulus, it is a moment of truth. He sees the writing on the wall. The Germans are losing the battle, and the M2 is at the heart of their defeat. There is no counter to it. There is no strategy that will allow the Germans to overcome the firepower and coordination of the American forces. The M2 has proven that it is the superior weapon, and the Germans have no answer. April 1944. Eastern Front. The wind is bitterly cold, sweeping across the barren, war-torn landscape. In a trench overlooking the flat, desolate expanse, Lieutenant Werner Schultz watches through binoculars as the American B-17 formations approach. His heart sinks as he marks the slow, steady progression of the bombers toward their target. They're coming in from the west, and it's clear from the way the bombers are flying in tight formations that they've done this before. The Americans know exactly what they're doing. Schultz grips the edge of the trench, his fingers aching as the B-17 seconds move closer. The American bombers have become a terrifying constant in the skies above Germany. But it's not just the bombers themselves that strike fear into the hearts of the German soldiers. It's the M2 Browning, 50 caliber machine guns, mounted on them, the relentless firepower that turns each B-17 into an MT, impenetrable fortress. Schultz had heard the stories from his fellow soldiers how the M2S had turned the tide of battles, how German pilots had been ripped apart in mid-air by the sheer volume and precision of the machine gun's fire. The M2 wasn't just a weapon, it was a symbol of American superiority. Each shot from its muzzle not only killed but chipped away at the last remnants of German morale. As Schultz scans the horizon, he feels the weight of those stories pressing down on him. His battalion has been stationed here for months, preparing for a potential assault, but nothing could have prepared them for what was coming today. The B-17 seconds are not just bombing machines, they're flying platforms of destruction, armed with weapons that can tear apart tanks, vehicles, and anything else caught in their path. The sound of distant engines grows louder as the bombers draw closer. Schultz can hear the low hum of the B-17 seconds over the shrieking wind. The Germans have established anti-aircraft defences, but Schultz knows that nothing short of a direct hit will stop these bombers. And even if they take out one bomber, there are dozens more, all protected by the relentless fire of the M2S. Schultz's thoughts are interrupted by the whine of approaching aircraft German fighters attempting to intercept the American bombers before they reach the defensive lines. Schultz watches in horror as the German fighters close in, hoping to take advantage of the B-17 seconds' relatively slow speed. But as they draw near, the M2S open fire. The sound is deafening as the heavy rounds rip through the air. The German fighters are struck almost immediately. One is hit its engines, flaming as it plummets toward the earth. Another German plane explodes in a massive fireball. The M2S are doing their job defending the bombers, cutting down anyone foolish enough to get too close. The German pilots had hoped to take the bombers down in a coordinated assault, but they had underestimated the M2S. They had underestimated the power of American industry and the determination of its soldiers. Schultz watches helplessly as the B-17 seconds continue their approach, the air filled with the deafening roar of the M2S. He knows the bombers will not be stopped. The German defences, despite their best efforts, have been rendered useless against the sheer firepower of the M2. In the trenches, the mood is grim. Schultz can hear the murmurs of his fellow soldiers, their faces pale as the realization sinks in. This is not just a battle they're losing. This is a war they're losing. And the M2 Browning, 50 caliber machine gun, is a key reason why. It represents a technological leap the Germans simply cannot overcome. It has shattered any illusions they might have had about the superiority of their tactics and their technology. The fear that had once been reserved for the Allies' tanks and artillery now extends to the skies. The M2 has proven to be the great equalizer, turning every B-17 into a fortress that is almost impossible to breach. What had once been a relatively easy task, shooting down bombers, is now a deadly game, one that the Germans are losing. Schultz knows that even if the Germans manage to hold off the American ground assault, they will never be able to stop the bombers. The M2S ensure that. As the B-17 seconds draw closer, the Germans begin to scatter. There's no point in staying to fight. What they're facing isn't just another enemy army. It's an industrial juggernaut equipped with weapons that make it nearly unstoppable. Schultz's mind races, but there's no escape. The M2S are everywhere. They are the embodiment of the Americans' industrial power, a power that has already begun to crush German hopes of victory. And it's not just the soldiers on the ground who feel the weight of the M2S. In the command centers, the German leadership is starting to realize that they are facing an enemy they can't match. The M2 is more than just a weapon. It's a symbol of American determination and technological advancement. The German forces, despite their best efforts, cannot keep up. They are being outmatched, outproduced, and outgunned in ways they never anticipated. And the M2 is at the heart of it all. Schultz stands in the trench, watching the bombers get closer. He knows the end is coming. The M2 has proven to be the weapon that the Germans feared most. And now, it's just a matter of time before the final blow falls. June 1944. Normandy, France. The air is thick with smoke and the acrid scent of burning fuel. The constant hum of American bombers fills the sky, a harbinger of the relentless assault that's unfolding below. Sergeant Carl Weber huddles behind a weathered sand dune, watching as the B-17 seconds fly overhead. He can hear the distant crackle of gunfire and the ever-present roar of the M2 Browning 50 caliber machine guns mounted on the bombers. Each burst seems to cut through the air with brutal precision, a reminder of the power the Americans wield in the skies. Weber's pulse quickens. He has seen it before, how the M2S shred anything in their path. It's not just the damage they inflict, it's the constant pressure they create. No matter where the Germans move, the M2S are waiting. They are the ultimate defensive weapon, capable of protecting the bombers while tearing apart everything the Germans throw at them. The effect is psychological as much as physical. The German soldiers have been fighting in Normandy for weeks, but each day feels like a new nightmare. The beach is a killing field, and the M2S mounted on American bombers seem to be everywhere. It's not just the immediate threat they pose, it's the sheer inevitability of the situation. The M2S create an unrelenting rhythm that wears down the resolve of even the most seasoned soldiers. It's not just the fear of being shot down or hit by shrapnel, it's the constant bombardment, the sense that no matter how hard they fight, they are outmatched. Weber's eyes narrow as another B-17 passes overhead. His grip tightens on his rifle, but he knows it's futile. He can hear the M2S firing from the bomber, the sound echoing through the battlefield. The Germans have set up anti-aircraft positions, but the American bombers are flying too high, and the M2S are too effective. Each attempt to fire at the bombers is met with the deadly barrage from above, and the soldiers below, like Weber, are left in helpless fury. He can see one of his comrades, a fellow soldier named Dieter, trying to reposition a machine gun to target the bombers. Before Dieter can even raise the weapon, a burst of M2 fire tears through the air, and Dieter drops to the ground lifeless. Weber's stomach churns as he watches his comrade's body fall. The M2 has claimed another victim, but it's not just the immediate casualties that weigh on the soldiers. It's the growing realization that the M2 is the key to the success of the American assault. The Germans had once thought their tactics and technology could overcome any challenge, but the M2 has proven them wrong. It is the perfect weapon to defend the B-17 seconds and ensure their effectiveness. And the psychological toll it takes on the soldiers, knowing that they cannot defeat it, is just as damaging as the physical wounds. The M2 Browning is not just a weapon, it is a symbol of the futility of their struggle. For the German soldiers on the ground, it represents everything they are up against. The Americans have found a way to turn their bombers into flying fortresses, and the M2 ensures that nothing can touch them. The air is filled with the sound of the machine guns, and the Germans, no matter how hard they fight, cannot escape it. As Weber crouches in the sand, the M2s continue to fire overhead, cutting through the air like a constant, unyielding storm. He feels the weight of the weapon on his chest, the oppressive sense that no matter what the Germans do, the M2 will be there, ready to tear them apart. The feeling of helplessness is overwhelming. The American bombers with their M2s have turned the tide of the battle in ways that the Germans cannot overcome. For the soldiers below, there is no escape from the sound of the M2s. It is the sound of defeat, a constant reminder that their efforts will be in vain. Each pull of the trigger from the M2 is like a death sentence marking the end of their hope. Weber's mind races, but he knows there is nothing left to do. The M2 is unstoppable. It has become the backbone of the American assault, and it will not be silenced. The Germans are losing, and the M2 is the reason why. As the B-17 seconds press on, Weber watches the devastation unfold. The M2 has proven that it is not just a weapon, it is the heart of the American war machine. The Germans cannot match it, and the psychological toll it takes on the soldiers is just as powerful as the physical destruction it leaves behind. For the German forces, the war is no longer about tactics, it's about survival against a foe armed with the unrelenting power of the M2. And that, more than anything else, is what breaks them. September 1944. The Western Front. The night sky is heavy with the distant rumble of artillery fire. As the B-17 Flying Fortress formation flies over the German countryside, the rhythmic hum of their engines is accompanied by the familiar thud of 50 caliber rounds being fired from the bomber's defensive M2 Browning. Machine guns. Staff Sergeant Thomas "Tommy" McCall, stationed in the belly turret of his B-17, peers through the scope, his fingers twitching on the trigger. The night is quiet for now, but the familiar weight of tension settles in. At any moment the Luftwaffe could strike. Tommy knows the drill. The M2s have saved his life countless times in the skies above Europe. The machine guns aren't just part of the bomber's defense, they are its backbone, its primary shield against enemy fighters that circle like vultures waiting for the right moment to pounce. He takes a deep breath, steadies his hand, and waits. For the Germans below it is a different story. The Luftwaffe pilots, though skilled, have been feeling the weight of the American technological edge for months. They've learned the hard way that they can't rely on their speed or numbers alone to defeat the B-17 seconds. The M2 Browning. 50 caliber machine guns mounted on the bombers have proven to be the ultimate deterrent, shredding anything in their path. The Germans have tried everything from diving attacks to coordinated ambushes, but the M2s are always there waiting to meet them. As McCall watches the radar, his eyes flick to the horizon. The enemy is closing in. A formation of German fighters approaches. The M2s will do their job. They always do. But there's an edge to the tension. Now a realization that every move the Americans make is a step closer to victory. The Luftwaffe is fighting a losing battle, and the M2 Browning 50 caliber machine guns are a key reason why. The B-17 seconds aren't just bombing targets, they are reshaping the rules of aerial combat. The M2 has transformed the bomber from a vulnerable target into a nearly indestructible fortress. The American bombers can now protect themselves with overwhelming firepower, denying the Germans the ability to interfere with their missions. For the German pilots, it's a constant reminder that they are no longer fighting just to stop a bombing run. They are fighting against the very industrial might that has propelled the United States to dominance in the skies. The M2 is no longer just a weapon of war, it is a symbol of the technological edge that the United States holds over its enemies. It represents the power of American industry of mass production and innovation, making it clear that the U.S. is not just in the war, it is leading it. The M2's presence in the skies over Europe is proof of that fact. It is an embodiment of everything the Germans cannot match: precision, firepower, and coordination on an industrial scale. McCall feels the surge of pride in his chest as he grips the M2's controls. He knows that the American war effort is sustained by more than just manpower. It is sustained by technology, by the machines and weapons like the M2 that give the United States its edge. It's not just the power of a single weapon, it's the power of a nation's ability to produce and deploy it on an unimaginable scale. The Germans have been fighting with what they had, but the Americans are outproducing them, outgunning them, and outclassing them in every theater of war. The Germans know it too. As the American bombers press on, the German Luftwaffe fighters are forced to retreat. Another wave of M2 fire has neutralized their attempt to break up the formation. The relentless barrage of 50 caliber rounds tears through the air, hitting their mark with unerring accuracy. The fighters that aren't shot down scatter, too afraid to engage the B-17 seconds again. The M2 has once again proven its power, and the Germans know they are facing something they cannot defeat. For the German soldiers on the ground, the M2 is more than just a machine. It is a constant reminder of the superiority of American production. The U.S. has mastered the art of mass production, and the M2 is just one example of how that superiority has turned the tide of the war. The Germans, despite their ingenuity and their advanced technology, simply cannot match the sheer scale of the American war machine. For Tommy McCall and the rest of the American crews, the M2 is not just a weapon, it is a shield, a lifeline in the chaos of combat. It is the reason they return home to tell the stories, the reason they survive the deadly skies above Europe. For the Germans, it is a symbol of their own limitations. The M2 has become the face of their defeat, an indomitable force that no amount of courage, no amount of ingenuity can overcome. As McCall watches another wave of German fighters retreat into the distance, he knows that the war is turning in the Allies' favor. The M2, Browning, 50 caliber machine gun is more than just a weapon. It is the key to the success of the American air campaign. And for the Germans, it is a reminder that no matter how hard they fight, they cannot match the overwhelming power of American industry. May 1945, Berlin, Germany. The war is over. The streets of Berlin lie in ruin, the echoes of artillery and air raids now replaced by the distant murmur of surrender. Major General Friedrich von Paulus walks through the debris-strewn streets, his face drawn and weary. The Allied forces have claimed victory, and the Germans are left to pick up the pieces of a shattered nation. As he makes his way through the devastated city, von Paulus reflects on the war that has just ended and the weapon that contributed so significantly to his army's defeat. The M2, Browning, 50 caliber machine gun, a weapon once dismissed by many as just another tool in the American arsenal, has proven to be the game-changer that tipped the balance in the skies over Europe. The German leadership had failed to anticipate the American industrial and technological superiority, and the M2, with its unparalleled firepower, had been a constant reminder of that. The German Luftwaffe pilots had learned the hard way that the B-17 Flying Fortress was no longer just a bomber, it was a flying fortress armed with a deadly array of 50 caliber M2s that could tear through the skies and neutralize any threat. The M2s had become the ultimate symbol of American resilience, industrial power, and technological innovation. And for the Germans, they represented a clear reminder of what they had lost. The war was no longer a contest of tactics, but one of resources and production capabilities. Von Paulus recalls the numerous air battles over the Western Front, where the M2s shredded German aircraft with ruthless efficiency. No matter how skilled the German pilots were, they were up against a weapon they could not defeat. The M2 had redefined the concept of aerial defense. What was once a vulnerability in the American bombers had become their greatest strength, and it had taken the Germans far too long to understand that they could not rely on their traditional tactics to overcome it. As von Paulus surveys the city, he can't help but reflect on the psychological toll the M2 had taken on the German forces. It was not just the destruction it caused, it was the realization that the Germans had no answer to it. For months, the Luftwaffe pilots had tried to adapt their tactics, coming in from every angle to attack the bombers. But every time they approached, the M2S would open fire, sending them scrambling or crashing to the earth. The Germans had underestimated the Americans' ability to coordinate their tactics and weaponry, and the M2 had been the linchpin that held it all together. The legacy of the M2 goes beyond its battlefield performance. It stands as a testament to American industrial power and ingenuity. While the Germans relied on their advanced technology, the Americans relied on sheer production capability to deliver weapons like the M2 to the front lines in overwhelming numbers. This was the true strength of the American war effort, the ability to outproduce the enemy and supply their forces with the tools they needed to win. For von Paulus and his fellow officers, the M2 remains a symbol of their failure to keep pace with the Americans. The war was lost not just because of tactical mistakes or miscalculations on the battlefield, but because of the unmatched industrial might of the United States. The M2 Browning, the .50 caliber machine gun, had become a symbol of that power, an undeniable force that could not be stopped. As the days stretch into weeks and the reality of defeat sets in, von Paulus reflects on the war and the lessons it holds. The M2 Browning machine gun, once thought of as just another piece of military equipment, has earned its place in history as one of the most effective and transformative weapons of World War II. For the Germans, it was the weapon they could never overcome, and for the Americans, it was a symbol of their industrial superiority, a reminder of the vast resources and technological prowess that helped win the war. In the silence of a defeated Berlin, the M2 continues to echo in the memories of those who fought. It represents not just the firepower that won battles, but the spirit of a nation that refused to back down, that used its industrial might to turn the tide of the war. The M2 was more than just a weapon, it was the embodiment of a strategy that the Germans could not match, and it ensured that the Allied victory would be complete. The war may have ended, but the legacy of the M2 Browning, the .50 caliber machine gun, will live on as a symbol of American resolve, technological innovation, and the decisive role that industrial strength played in shaping the outcome of World War II.